Dataverse. So I am joining you guys from Wellington, New Zealand today. I've got an agenda that will go through how Dataverse is used in the Power Platform space, how it's the center of all of that, and why it's the right choice to use compared to other competitive products. But also, what I would like to sort of let you guys know is that Dataverse is being used quite significantly in the space of any COVID-related applications because of its flexibility, because of its scalability, and so on. So a little bit about the agenda of today. I'll start by introducing myself. Who am I? A little bit about my background and so on. What is Dataverse? Understanding exactly the basics. I've noticed, as per my previous questions that I've asked, that some people are new to the Power Platform. So I'm really keen to actually talk a little about sort of the basics of Dataverse, what it is, what its background, and so on. What are the competitive products that are available out there? I'm just going to focus on Microsoft because, as usual, there are so many different ways of sort of addressing the same task. And throughout my career, I have gone through most of the ones that I'm going to be listing in today's presentation. But Dataverse is by far my favorite way of actually dealing with some of those sort of typical requirements, and I'll talk to you guys why Dataverse is better than the other competitive products. We'll talk about how you can display information coming from Dataverse. What are your different options? So we briefly talked in the previous session about model-driven, about Canvas, about portals. So obviously there are different ways of actually displaying this information. And then after that, I'll talk about how you can extend it. So if you want to add additional capabilities to it, sort of what are the different elements in there and how you can sort of get it to do a little bit more. Connecting to Dataverse, what are your different types of endpoints that you can use to retrieve the information from Dataverse? And finally, sort of securing Dataverse, but also monitoring the capabilities within Dataverse. Cool. So a little bit about myself. I'm Rami. You probably, if you follow me on LinkedIn, or you might have seen some of those sort of videos or announcements where I'm actually traveling virtually around the world and trying to do a tour. Just to sort of talk a little bit about Dynamics 365, the Power Platform, what's the latest and the greatest, maybe give some people advice on, best practices and how to use things. I'm trying to do that sort of in a new innovative way of presenting. So as you can see, today I am sort of presenting through my camera. I'm not sharing slides. I have that superimposed sort of information behind me just to give it a more interactive look and feel when I'm doing my presentation. And I'll talk a little about how I'm doing that. There's a few sort of cities that I still want to visit in Southeast Asia, and then I'm going to sort of virtually move to Europe and then go to the US, and then just try and have sessions just around the world, just to have some fun and then to meet some new people as well. A while back, I've written a book about Dynamics 365. It's probably very dated right now, but surprisingly, it still stands a little bit. So when I wrote it, I tried to make sure that the information is a little bit timeless, so that the book would last a little bit. But I've been approached by the publisher again for a newer version. So maybe if I have some free time among the many things that I do, I might consider that. And among other things, I am an MVP as well. So I keep busy in the community, and as such, we get awarded the MVP title, which is pretty good. Sort of the next part that I want to talk about is just the technique that I'm using to actually sort of do this presentation. So what I've got in the background in here is a green screen. So behind me, you can't see it, but there is actually a big, ugly green screen that sort of has, is filtered out through an application that I'm using, and it just sort of takes my picture and then crops everything around me. So you can see my chair. You can see my hands, but I'm not using the sort of out-of-the-box Teams sort of cropping, but it's something different. It's the chroma key, so what they use in movies and with the weather girl when you're watching the news. And then what I do is that I sort of slide in between those two layers, sort of the presentations that I'm doing or the desktop that I have. And then that gives you the effect that you see right now, which means that I'm a bit more interactive, so I can talk to you guys. You can see my face, but it's not just slides talking to you. The slides are just in the background to illustrate the topics that I'm talking about. So I've used, my setup is not too fancy. So, I don't think anything that I own other than my computer costs more than $100. So I've got a webcam to capture sort of good video quality. I've got a couple of halo lights on either side just to even out the lights. PowerPoint presentation that are sort of running in the background, and I'm just going through the different slides, and then my laptop or my computer that actually processes all of that. All of this information then gets fed into OBS. OBS is a really cool tool that allows you to do that chroma key capability, and then it sort of filters out the information and feeds it as a virtual webcam into Teams. And then I just use an external microphone just for better audio quality. So anybody can do that setup. If you're interested in knowing a little bit more about it, look me up on YouTube. I've got a little video that explains sort of the different techniques that I used and how I do it. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me and get to know a little bit more about that setup. Anyway, so again, as I'm doing that virtual tour, I just wanted to reinvent the way we're presenting. This is one way of reinventing it by doing sort of what other MVP called the weather girl sort of setup. But also this year, what I'm trying to do is just have Slido. So if you guys, just as per the previous session, if you guys can sort of open either on your laptop, your computer, or if you have a mobile phone or a tablet around you, just pick it up, go to slido.com. And I'll ask you a few questions, and that way we can interact a little bit better, and I can get to know you guys a little bit better as well. All right. So hopefully you guys are ready. So the number is 1902, and this is the first question that is coming up. Did I go too far? No, yeah, that's the right one. So the first question is, what is your background? So if you have used the platform before, so you are either have a CRM background, or you've done SharePoint in the past, and now you're sort of moving into the Power Platform. You're a .NET, so pure developer, or whether it's something completely different. One of the things that I haven't figured out how to do at the moment, oops, just restart that, is I'm not very familiar with Slido. This is one of the early attempts that I'm using it. It does look like it's working fine. But whenever we're saying other, I can't really understand what is the actual technology that you guys are using. So feel free to drop it into the chat, or when you do your survey at the end of the day, just tell us a little bit about what was your background and why are you thinking about using the Power Platform. But those are very good results. Good participation as well. I think we've got more than 2/3 that are actually answering those questions, which is fantastic. And it's a lot of people, similar to my experience, have started with sort of the traditional CRM back in the days. I think I started in 2008, and back then it was like CRM 3.0, 4.0, and then it went through all the different variations. In the past, it used to be an on-premise only, whereas now I don't think I've touched the on-premise version for the last 5 years, so it's online only. Most of our customers, even government, are more than comfortable using the Australian data centers to host their Dynamics instances. What's really interesting as well is that now we've got a new data center sort of being built in New Zealand, so everybody wants a piece of that, and everybody wants to put their data in there. So good responses. It's good to see that some people have either other SharePoint or .NET. I think just about 40% of the rest of the people are in that space. So it's really great to see that. And welcome to the Power Platform, the light side, as we like to call it. And if you have used the Power Platform, I'm really keen to understand sort of what you prefer in terms of using that. I think we've asked that question before. So a lot of people sort of prefer to use model-driven as opposed to the Canvas, or this is just the way it sort of came up. But yeah, some people never used it as well. So it's really good to see those answers in here. All right, cool. So let's go through the rest of the presentation. And the first one is, what is Dataverse? So let me just fix my screens. Here we go. All right, so Dataverse has, like, historically, if you go back into the different naming conventions, at some stage they called it the Common Data Service. Common data services, which, you know, within the name you can tell that it's about data. I think for a very, very short period of time they called it DataFlex, and then they realized that they had a copyright issue in there. But historically, it didn't have a name. It was just Dynamics CRM or Dynamics 365. It was just part of the package. And what Microsoft tried to do is to separate the data layer from the user interface. And then they introduced concepts like model-driven apps, which is the interface on top of Dataverse. So at the core of it, Dataverse, at the core of it, Dataverse is a database. So it includes tables, it includes different data types, and relationships between those different data types. So think of it as a relational database. But over the years, it has improved quite significantly, and it turned into something much bigger than that. And we'll talk a little bit about sort of some of those capabilities. So the first one is, within Dataverse, what different data types do you have? And this is very important to understand what are the basic data types and how it evolved over the times. So starting with the simple things, like you've got text, you've got numbers, you've got Booleans, multi-choices, dates and time. So all of those are single text that you can, single values that you can have in there. Now, collectively, those would create what we call a table. Historically, we used to call it an entity. Now they sort of standardized the term because we're talking more about a database capability, a sort of a data repository. Now we call them tables. So put them together, and then you will get a structure, and that structure is going to create a table. Once you have a table, within that table, you can reference other tables. So this is what they call lookups. So you can have a reference to multiple tables. So for example, let's say an organization table, an account table can have multiple contexts, multiple persons associated with that organization. But then if you look at it from the other way around, if you have a sort of individual, a contact will have one parent organization, as an example. So we had a question in here that just popped up. Is it proprietary to Microsoft, or is it open source? It is proprietary. So this is a capability that is provided by Microsoft for the Power Platform and sort of Dynamics 365. The thing about it, the thing to note is that it's a level above a database. So you actually do not get physical access to your database itself. It's all hosted by Microsoft, and the only way you can interact with it is through a user interface, the maker experience, and I've got a screenshot on that allows you to go into that console, if you want, or a portal, and then you can go and design your tables. You can design all the different data types, the relationships, and so on. And it's all done purely on the sort of online side. You cannot download it or download the database itself. You can extract the data, and there are many ways of doing that, but the database itself is all proprietary by Microsoft. It's powered by SQL capabilities and other capabilities as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Now that we have our tables, now there are different ways that you can group those. So if you want to have a field that may not be related to one table. So for example, you want to have a customer field, and that customer field can be either an account or an organization or a person, a contact. And in that case, we've got something called a customer field, which is a polymorphic field that allows you to select more than one table. And this is a step beyond what SQL provides you. So originally in SQL, you have a foreign key and a primary key. The foreign key will always be pointing to the same table. Whereas now with Dataverse, you can say, it can actually be any table. And they actually introduced a more advanced version of that polymorphism, where you can have like any table, not just the customer table. And this has just been released in the latest wave. So I can say, I've got different application types. I've got, let's say, signing up application. I've got a signing out application. I've got a, application for a loan. All of those are applications. So my lookup can be towards any of those applications. So I don't have to specify exactly which one I'm after. And then on top of all of those, you would think, okay, that's data at the core of it. Like, we've got tables, and those tables have values in them, just string values or numeric values and so on. Well, Microsoft also in the last couple of years released a new data type called file. And that way you can actually attach files into your sort of table. So that really gives you a very rich capability. Now, it does have limitations. The files cannot be larger than 32 megabytes, if I'm not mistaken. So it does come with some limitations that you can consider, but most of the time it would be fit for purpose for what you're trying to achieve. And there are ways of extending that. So this is Dataverse, just the core of it, the databases and the capabilities. Now, on top of it, you can introduce a lot of different enhancements that would take you a long time to build in something like SQL. So, for example, you can introduce business logic using point and click, a graphical interface to say, if, calculate fields, for example, you can say, as I'm adding more contacts into an account table, I can do a roll-up field and count them at the organization level. I can know how many contacts are related to that organization. This is sort of a business logic that you can introduce purely by using point and click without writing any code. And this is the power of the platform, is that a lot of it is configurable, not necessarily something you do through customization. So what are the competitions that are available out there? You can use something like Excel Online. You can use something like SharePoint, which is a glorified Excel Online if you want, if you're talking about SharePoint lists. Or you can go sort of basic and go with Azure SQL. So let's go through each one of those and decide which one works and which one doesn't work. So starting with Excel. Excel is Excel, right? It's just a number of cells, spreadsheets, and you just have information in there. You can potentially have some graphics on top of it. You can have more than one person sort of using that specific field or spreadsheet. Recently, they've introduced the collaboration, so the co-authoring, so you have more than one person working on the same spreadsheet. But at the end of the day, it's just a flat list. Doing relationships is not that easy, and then building an interface on top of that is very limited. The next option, so yes, I think I saw a question sort of pop up. I am talking about it in the context of Microsoft. So it's, what are other options available within the Microsoft space? If we go beyond that, then obviously there are many other CRM sort of solutions that are available out there, Salesforce being the #1 competitor in the US specifically. But yeah, there are other options available out there. But given sort of the focus of this conference is going to be more focused on Microsoft technologies. So the next one I wanted to talk about is SharePoint. So with SharePoint, again, it's a step beyond Excel, because a lot of the stuff you can do with point and click. It's part of the ecosystem, so you can trigger automation, when a record is created, when a record is updated. But again, at the core of it, it's a list, SharePoint lists. That's what they call them. They do come with many limitations, as in, you can't have more than 50,000 records, for example. Otherwise, performance is going to start degrading. We're talking about sort of limits on what you can display on a screen, and the user interface itself. So as you can see on the right-hand side, sort of just around there, is very limited. So the way it displays the data, the way you sort of edit the data, it's limited in some ways. What you can do is build a Canvas app on top of it and then power it by SharePoint lists in the background. But again, that does come with some limitations. So Dataverse will give you this flexibility and scalability, which is the most important one. Moving on to something a bit more fundamental, such as Azure SQL. So this is basic. So you do get the scalability, you get the relationships, you do get sort of many data types and so on. It's super fast because it's built on technology that has decades of experience. You know, it's SQL servers. But again, there's a lot of customization that will be required to get it to the point where you can get with a product like the Power Platform. So we're talking about, you know, if you want to build an interface, then this has to be built from scratch. There might be some tools available out there, but again, it's not natively integrated the way the Power Platform is with its user interfaces. You know, if you want to add security, that's another level of customization that you have to do on top of it. So with SQL comes flexibility, but comes complexity and sort of expensive capabilities that needs to be built on top of it. So why Dataverse? This is the maker experience that I was talking about. The maker experience is really user-friendly. Again, they've improved it significantly over the last 10, 15 years. Now they've got this new sort of make.microsoft.com, where you can go in there, use point and click, select the tables that you want, the fields that you want, add any data types in there, be it, you know, basic data types or files or relationships and so on. And then you can package all of that within a solution. So the solution is the container that takes it all and then deploy it into different SDLC environments. And that's really big for Microsoft, the sort of ALM, sort of the application lifecycle management, where you can have multiple environments, a dev, a test, a pre-prod, a prod, and so on. And then that will allow you to build in a dev environment, use something like Azure DevOps pipeline automation to take your customization from one environment to the other, deploy it in there, run testing on it, and then push it into the next environment and so on. So very mature in that space, you know, tons of investment happening in that space as well, and really easy to use. The next thing that you would have with Dataverse is the user interface. So we're talking about sort of model-driven. Model-driven is what you see in sort of in the background. So the navigation is already done for you, sort of where the buttons go, where the titles go, and so on. That's already predefined for you. So you don't have to think about it. This is what it comes like out of the box. There's a few things you can customize here and there, sure. But largely, there's a lot of things that you cannot do, and that's on purpose, so that you don't have to think about it. You say, you go to your organization, you say, this is what the product looks like. It does, let's say, 80% of what we want from a look and feel. The 20% we can customize in terms of what exactly do we want to show on the form, you know, the areas where we want to display them and so on. But on top of that, you can introduce something like a business process flow, which is the screenshot in there. So the business process flow shows you the different stages of the record that you're in. So for example, you receive an onboarding application, someone who wants to join your services or join your organization. Then the business process flow will display at the top all the stages that you have to go through. So, you know, checking validity of the application, processing the application, approving the application, and providing them with an answer. Each one of those would be a step, and each one of those steps will have a bunch of information that you have to collect about it and then store it in there. So all of that sort of would help you sort of build that. And again, out of the box, point and click, very little customization. If you don't like that sort of predefined or pre-cooked look and feel, you can go into something that we call the Canvas apps. Canvas apps is pixel perfect. So you have, you know, the freedom to do whatever you want with it. You can have it, you know, move the labels, for example, in a specific corner, format them in a specific color and a specific font and a specific size, you know, add fields, add buttons, change the shape of the buttons and so on. So it's pixel perfect. And it gives you that sort of flexibility to do anything you want. Think of it as like HTML, but you don't have to write HTML code. Behind the scenes, it is HTML. But the way you build it is by dragging and dropping and then saying, I want a button in here, I want a field in here, and so on. And it links within your Dataverse, so it understands that this information is coming from Dataverse, so that it gives you this sort of record lifecycle. So creating a new record, saving a record, this binding between the back end and the front end is done out of the box, so you don't have to worry about it, which is really, really cool. Now, all of those are internal to an organization, so you need to be licensed within your organization to be able to use Dataverse and to be able to use this user interface. However, if you want to provide something to the public where they can sort of type in information like submit an application, register, and then this information would end up in Dataverse, and then you can use model-driven and Canvas to manage this data, then the solution for you is Portals. Portals is, again, another sort of out-of-the-box capability that provides you to expose some of this information to the public. It's secure by nature because the information that you've got in there has to go through a specific security structure to make sure that, you know, not everybody can access everybody else's data. So you can put it all in there, and then you can sort of display it in a nice and easy way to be implemented. Again, Portal has its own sort of history. Each one of those I can spend probably a day just talking about. Portals is a very big topic. They run, you know, 3-day courses on Portals as well. So it's quite a rich capability that I'm just talking about in 30 seconds, basically. And just conscious that I'm also running out of time. Now, let's take it a step further and talk a little bit about security, which is sort of one of my favorite topics. I've done sort of hour-long sessions on security. And the good thing about security is that it's quite comprehensive over who can see the records, how you can hide them, how you can structure them in your organization. So, for example, the HR department can see specific records, whereas the sort of usual users can see a different set of records or a subset of those records, and so on. So you can sort of work on privacy, and you can do it at different levels of your organization. You know, we're talking about the usual CRUD, who can create, read, update, delete, but also you can say who can share records and so on. And then within security, you can limit what they can do with the platform. So, for example, can they export the data in an Excel spreadsheet, which may be a way of leaking information. So you can search off this capability within the security roles that you build within the Dataverse environment. And then that takes us to extensions. How can you extend the Dataverse and the model-driven apps? So you can have something like, if you're talking about front-end user experience, you can use JavaScript. That's mainly for model-driven. But then if it's back-end, like, you know, for example, when I create a new record, I want to run some logic that would do some validation, that would go and integrate the record with other bits, that would enrich the data, then I can use plugins. If you don't want to write code to do that, you can use Power Automate. And hopefully in the next session, Eliza, Marianne, and Kasun can talk a little bit about sort of their experience using Power Automate and what's new coming up in the Power Automate. Power Automate is like a workflow automation engine that helps you sort of progress the records in different ways and capabilities. And if that's not enough, you can always reach out to Azure. You can sort of offload some of that sort of logic into Azure and then do it in there. Now that we've understood sort of the platform, how to extend it, maybe some of the user interfaces that come with it, the security, how can you retrieve the data out of it? So if you don't want a user interface, you want something a little bit more than that. So what are the endpoints that allow you to sort of reach out to that data? So the first capability is to export that data into an Excel spreadsheet. Really easy. You can export it, change it, import it back. Very convenient capability, but again, comes with its limitations and maybe some security concerns. If you've got machine to machine or like you know, want to do it in a programmatic way, you can use an OData endpoint, like a REST service that the platform exposes, and that allows you to actually, you know, communicate with the platform, create records, update records, retrieve records, delete records, associate records, and so on. So it's quite rich in terms of capabilities. And then you can build some custom endpoints. So for example, I want to retrieve a structure, not just one record. So you can build sort of a customization in there and then say, all right, well, I'm going to say, get me an account, but actually what I want is the account and all the context in there. So you can create a custom endpoint for that capability. And then finally, and again, released recently, relatively recently, is the TDS endpoint, which makes it look like a database, a SQL database. Now, as I said, behind the scenes, most of the data structure is actually driven by a SQL database. So they provide you with a facade that looks like you're connecting to the database, but in fact, there are a few layers in between that filter out what you can and cannot do. But that gives you the flexibility of dealing with it as if it's a SQL database. And last but not least, and it's a topic for today that Anu is going to be covering, is the export to Synapse. So that allows you to sort of export all of your data into Azure Data Lake storage. And once it's in there, then you've got the power of ADLS or of a data lake. So you can, run advanced queries on it, advanced analytics, transform the data, do an ETL process, integrate it with other systems, and so on. And that means that the load is not touching your main database. It's actually touching the external services. So you're not affecting the performance of the main platform. You're just exporting that data in near real time, and then you're doing the processing outside of all of that. I'm just running low on time, so I'll just go really quickly through the last couple of slides. So data loss prevention allows you to decide what is allowed from a policy perspective to extract that data or to integrate it with other services. So with Power Automate, for example, you can have one flow, one sort of workflow, if you want, that can export data from Dataverse, deal with it, and then do something else with it. But then you also have connectors like Twitter. So what you can say is you can stop people using Twitter if they're using Dataverse, for example. So you don't tweet, every time a new customer comes in, for example, which might be a privacy breach. So you can define that. It will stop you from doing, intentional or accidental extraction of data. And also it can be done just either for the entire tenancy, so for your entire organization, or just on a specific instance. And you can control all the different connectors, and at a granular level. Like you can say, for the Twitter, I cannot tweet or retweet, but I can read information from Twitter. So you have it at a granular level to deal with it. From a monitoring perspective, you can use something that we call the Center of Excellence. There are some capabilities available out of the box that will allow you to understand who's using it, what is your traffic, are there any errors, any issues in there. But also you can enhance that with what we call the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, which gives you enhanced visibility over everything that is happening within your platform beyond what is available out of the box. And this is like a free add-on that you can just download, provided by Microsoft, by the CAT team, so the Customer Advisory team. And they've baked a lot of those sort of requests on what we want to do with the Center of Excellence and what information we want to extract out of it. And if that's not enough, you can extend it. And if you really want to, you can actually, this is open source, so the Center of Excellence kit. You can sort of do a fork, you can make some changes, and you can do a pull request and send it back to Microsoft and say, hey, there's that new feature that I've introduced that many have asked for. It's really cool. Can you introduce it in the core product? And then they'll do their review and they'll include it in there. So there's that picture that I really like, sort of about all the different bits that you get with Dataverse. So we sort of briefly talked about sort of the security, the first layer. We talked about sort of a business logic layer where you can either have some JavaScript, some plugins, or some other ways of extending it. Dealing with your data, who can see it, what can you do with it, how can you extract it, and so on. And then finally looking at sort of Azure integration, and then all the different interactions that you can have with some of the more sort of custom components of building your solution, extending it, running some heavy workloads in the Azure space, integrating with other systems, be it analytics or visualization, or just integrating it with other systems, which we know many organizations have. So in a nutshell, what is Dataverse? It's the center of the Power Platform. So using the same logo as what we've got, it will feed Power Automate. It will feed Power Apps. It will feed the Power BI. It will feed the virtual agent if we've got a chatbot. But also it's the backbone for portals that we're building. It can connect out of the box, just a few clicks with Azure Synapse. if you've got an AI capability using AI Builder that can get information from Dataverse, analyze it, and store the results in Dataverse. And finally, as I said, if you want to extend it even further, you can connect it to Azure if you want to. So with that, I get to the end of my presentation. I've got probably a couple of minutes left before we take a quick break and then head on to the next session. So any questions? Sorry, I haven't been looking at the chat, but are there any questions? Feel free to go off mute. Everybody can sort of connect and ask a question. I see that Hamish and Eliza have been answering some questions, which is really, really cool. Cool. Custom pages. Custom pages. Can you be a bit more clear about what custom pages are? Because custom pages have been introduced recently as a new feature to put in Canvas apps on model-driven. Is that what you're talking about? The new feature? Yeah. I am actually proposing it for one of my customers right now. So I've suggested that we use it. I don't know if there is anybody from my team that is on the call. Shobit probably would be sort of across that. But yeah, I've sort of suggested that we use it for one of my customers, and it's an awesome feature. It is in preview, so just keep that in mind. And the runtime is not in preview, so you can use custom pages. But if you want to use components, Canvas components within custom pages, that is still in preview. But what I did get from Microsoft is that go ahead and use it because it's a big area of investment that they're sort of leveraging. So I would recommend, yeah, if you want, pixel perfect in your model-driven app, go for custom pages. They're really awesome. They do the job. The one thing that I wish that they would do is that right now, a Canvas app and a custom page is sort of separate things. So you can't really say, I've got a Canvas app, I want to put it in a Canvas in a custom page, but you can build a custom page, or you can build a separate Canvas app or components and use them across. So that's something that they're still working on from a Microsoft perspective. But yeah, it's really, really cool. And I would recommend that you use them. Cool. Yeah, replacing web resources for sure. And that's exactly why we decided to go down that route, because we didn't want to go the custom sort of HTML and so on. So that's why we decided to just use custom pages. Good call. Good call. All right. So just a minute to go. Feel free to fill up the survey. So if you have some time, we would love to hear your feedback. And then just to know a little bit more about yourself, what you liked about the conference, what you didn't like, how we can improve over time. And just with 30 seconds to go, I'm going to stop my sharing. And hopefully Eliza, Marianne, and Kasun are on the call, and then we can start their session.